And my starting point is an observation in the rather troubling judgment that was passed in the Shaheen Bagh protest case. Right? This was the order that the Supreme Court passed recently. And the judgment was troubling in more ways and in more levels than one can list. First of all, passing an order when the matter has kind of become irrelevant, the protest has been shut down anyway. The order engaged in a kind of needless pontification on the morality of protest. It introduced novel and, to my mind, dangerous constitutional ideas that the exercise of rights, if protesting is a right, is somehow subject to the performance of duties irrelevant to that right. It's an order that completely whitewashed the court's own role in producing a crisis of legitimacy. I mean, why were there protests in the first place? In part because of the court's role in producing both a constitutional doctrine and then in not actually giving protesters a genuine hearing on the substantive matter at hand, namely, is the CAA discriminatory? Right? So for all those reasons, it's a strange order. But I want to give the court due respect, take them seriously as political theorists, and pick up on one sentence in that order which said, quote, the claim was, quote, that erstwhile mode and manner of dissent against colonial rule cannot be equated with dissent in a self-ruled democracy. Okay? Almost suggesting that there are forms of dissent that might be appropriate to colonial rule, maybe an authoritarian state, but these forms of dissent are not appropriate in a self-ruled democracy. Okay? In fact, you can extend the point further. Dissent in the form that was being enacted in Shaheen Bagh, right, might have been a mode of activity more suitable to a colonial and authoritarian regime, not to a democracy. Now, why is this claim important? Maybe it's just a throwaway remark. Maybe the justices did not mean anything considered and serious by it. But it is a remark that captures a lot of common sense views people have about democracy. It's quite an intuitive and widespread and appealing idea, actually. Right? After all, you might say in democracy, you have the freedom of expression. Words and argument, deliberation and rhetoric is the currency in which we express views and differences in a democracy. Now, of course, this claim would be helped a great deal if the courts protected freedom of expression and freedom of expression of all forms, including expression of contempt, which is also a form of legitimate criticism. But let's for a moment grant this point. Look, you have freedom of expression in a democracy. Use words, write, petition, make arguments, right? If words work, if the logic of arguments work, protest should not be necessary, right? Moreover, in a democracy, we can supposedly cashier the rulers for their misconduct, right? We can throw them out at the next election. So what more do you want by way of dissent? You can speak what you want. You can vote what you want, right? And in a sense, the bounds of legitimate activity are in a sense governed or enabled by these modes of expression. Add on to this a further point, which is often made by invoking Ambedkar's speech in the Constituent Assembly on the grammar of anarchy, in which the problem of dissent in democracy is compounded even further. On this view, the problem with a dissenter in a democracy is the dissenter claims unilateralism, right? The dissenter sets themselves up as a final judge and arbiter against court, against parliament, and sometimes even against public opinion, right? So people are protesting because they're not satisfied with the parliament's decision, they're not satisfied with the court's decision, they're not satisfied, or rather the court's non-decision. Sometimes they're even protesting against public opinion. Okay? Now, in a democracy, this form of dissent is kind of hard to understand and explain. Ambedkar was too good a political theorist, and of course recognizes the danger in unilateralism of dissent. After all, Gandhi's big sin in his eyes, right, was not just that Gandhi was patronizing about caste, but Gandhi was completely unilateral in the way in which he understood the rightness of his views. It's Gandhi right or wrong. Ekla Chalo Re may be a good, inspiring call for claims of conscience. It may be a good, inspiring call for protesters, right, standing valiantly against public opinion, but surely it can't be the basis for settling legitimate claims. The dissenters' seeming unilateralism, their sovereign pronouncement over the sovereign, as it were, right, my way or the highway, seems to be part of the problem, right? And the one thing we do when we enter civil society, when we leave the state of nature, as it were, I have a picture of Hobbes behind me, and I think on this Hobbes was right, as it were, is we do cede, in part, the right of unilateral judgment of what is right. In fact, political equality demands that we cede that, right? If I can unilaterally decide what is right, okay, then in a sense, I'm not granting you equal political standing. And so this idea of unilateralism also makes the figure of the dissenter a pretty suspicious figure in a liberal democracy, right? What are they claiming? Okay. So here is the paradox that the honorable justices might be hinting at when they say certain forms of protest are not appropriate to a liberal democracy. When they say in a democracy, you don't need protest and dissent in quite the same way. The thought is, in a perfectly functioning democracy, all relevant moral considerations have been taken into account, all discussions have taken place, respect due to all persons as free and equal has been granted, right? Why would you need dissent? Now, you might be tempted to respond, but that's exactly the point. Our democracy is deeply flawed. The representative process is not a responsive process. The rule of law is intermittent, and by God, the Supreme Court is making sure it's intermittent. And at best, often our democracy does little to protect the vulnerable and the marginalized, right? It's a perfectly good response to make to this worry. You might go further. You might say the court wants us to, in protesting, abide by our civic obligations. But you might say, are these civil obligations binding on people who do not have a fair share in this scheme of cooperation, right? If the basic scheme of social cooperation itself does not respect freedom, equality, and dignity of persons, right? Why should the onus of cooperating on civic obligations follow on those protesting, right? Think of, in a sense, the Adivasis, right? One group that, in a sense, has got the worst end of every state, colonial state, democratic state, right? Authoritarian state, right? Why should the burden of abiding by these civic obligations fall only on them in the absence of a framework that grants them minimal standing and reciprocity? Why are courts and parliament so keen to remind us of our duties only when there is a protest? What about reminding those who have the power to draw the larger social contract, right? Does not protest serve as an epistemic function of drawing attention to a problem that might otherwise go unnoticed in a democracy? Right? Do we still have an obligation? If civic obligation, if the social contract does not recognize us as free and equal? Okay? So this is a pushback you can give against the court. You're assuming these institutions are working well. Okay? What if they are not? This is a common sense answer, and I think empirically and descriptively a very, very powerful answer, right? Rule of law and democratic process can often be an abstraction. We throw in, as it were, a fight over relationships of power, right? They do not describe the existing realities of our institutions, right? And so we want to say, look, Protest is important. These are people, these are our fellow citizens protesting in the name of a higher order rule. Allow them to redeem the promise of democracy by bringing neglected concerns to your attention. Okay, this is a perfectly sensible answer to give. Why won't we give this answer? Now it turns out the problem is more complicated. It's not an easy answer to give. It sounds easy to give. That's what we always say, right? But ours is not a perfect democracy. It needs this safety valve. Why is it not an easy answer? It's not an easy answer for some, again, basic political reasons. No settled democratic processes like to admit that they are illegitimate in this way, right? No Supreme Court can admit that there is no rule of law in India in parts. No parliament can admit that we are not a deeply representative democracy, right? So in a sense, giving this answer that our formal institutions are imperfect, right, is already in some senses putting a question mark over their legitimacy, which they cannot accept. Okay? Sometimes you don't concede to this answer because politics is a partisan game and you do not want to concede to the other side. Whether we are right or wrong, whether the protesters are right or wrong is immaterial. What is important is they be defeated, right? So you see protests only in the framework of a kind of tactical negotiation. But there is an even deeper conceptual challenge. Why a democracy might look at suspicion and look askance at protest and dissent. And I'll be very crude about this, just to sort of concentrate on our mind. I mean, it's a bit simple-minded, but hopefully heuristically will work. So suppose you protest, right? The Shaheen Bagh protesters protested. Punjab farmers are protesting. If the protest and dissent is expressed before all other formal means of redress, right? Elections maybe, courts of law maybe, petitioning your MP maybe, right? Using the public sphere and writing maybe, whatever. If you protest before all other formal means of redressing your problem have been exhausted, then the court will say, well, isn't this protest unfair? Right? Why don't you use these settled means to convey what you want to convey? On the other hand, you can have another scenario where you have engaged all of these means. You have knocked at the door of the Supreme Court. You have knocked at the door of Parliament. You have petitioned every politician. You have got, every useless columnist to write an op-ed, right? Everything that a democracy allows you under free expression. And yet, the outcome is something that is deeply, deeply detrimental to the principles of liberal democracy. Maybe it's discriminatory. In which case, if you protest after the fact, the retort is, but look, you're engaging in unilateralism, right? How can you set yourself up as sovereign over what is right after Parliament has pronounced and after the court has pronounced, right? So here's, in a sense, the paradox. If you dissent and protest before all procedural remedies are exhausted, you're a troublemaker. If you dissent and protest after all remedies have been exhausted, right, you are basically a unilateral anarchist.